Dan Rubenstein, we have a Final Four. On one side of the bracket, it's going to be Ohio State against Texas. On the other, yeah, you guessed it, it's going to be Penn State against Notre Dame, the Solid Verbal of sorts. Of sorts. We can get into that over the next hour or so. Thank you for tuning back in to our show. This is the Solid Verbal. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Many of you listening to this may have joined one of our 3 previous streams, I guess, that we have done now over the last 24 hours or so. It's been a very, very busy time of year, given the bowl situation, given the world situation, given the schedule that we've had to adhere to. Alas, here we are again, Dan, recording deep into the night on a Thursday with news that Notre Dame is now the 4th team to make the college football playoff semifinal. How are you, my friend? You look cozy.
I'm great, Ty. This is really interesting to me. It's all really interesting to me. There are so many different angles to consider right now. No 2023 SEC team is in the Final Four. That's different. That's new. Notre Dame, Penn State. We've got a solid verbal East, right? The Ty Hildenbrandt connection is alive and well.
I need the Laura Quinn jersey stat. Yeah. I need to figure something out.
Yes. So we have that going. That's going in Miami. Cotton Bowl will host Ohio State, Texas. So bit of a de facto home game, at least geographically, for Texas. I don't know. A lot to consider here, Ty. I'm excited for both of these matchups, probably equally so, just because, and we're going to unpack it in a second, but Notre Dame beating Georgia the way they did.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say shocker. I picked it, so I had to get at least one of these picks right.
Yeah.
Georgia obviously down Carson Beck, but wasn't a huge difference. Gunnar Stockton was a totally winning quarterback in his effort against Notre Dame to me. Wow. Is I guess to sum it up. Wow.
We have a 5, we have a 6, we have a 7, and we have an 8.
All the byes beaten.
All the teams that had byes were beaten this round. All of the lower seeded teams won. There is a larger conversation, yes, that needs to occur about how they are seeding these teams, who gets the bye, the structure of this new playoff system. It's year 1. They're going to make some tweaks, just as they have made tweaks to all of the previous systems, hopefully to make it better. Alas, we're at where we're at. We've got a game next Thursday, the Capital One Orange Bowl. That one is between Penn State and Notre Dame. Right now, Notre Dame breaks is about a 1.5 favorite in that matchup. On the other side of things, we've got the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic. As you said, kind of a de facto home game, geographically speaking, for the Texas Longhorns. Ohio State breaks in that one as about a 6-point favorite. This is not our preview episode. This is, I guess, a recap of the recap. We did one yesterday. Go back and listen to that episode where we talked about the first 3 games, Dan.
Yes.
The point of this one is to not just recap the Georgia Notre Dame game, but also, I think, put what we're about to see and what we have seen in further context. So
yes,
why don't we start there? Your final in the All-State Sugar Bowl, 23-10, Notre Dame gets one over on the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, this was a game that was delayed about 19 and change hours because of the horrific events down in New Orleans that occurred on New Year's. They were able to get this game off the ground a little bit early. There were talks initially that it was going to be 8:45, kind of the standard kickoff time for the Sugar Bowl. Both teams lobbied to try and get this one played a little bit sooner for rest and recovery purposes, and they were able to pull that one off at 4 Eastern. As we're recording this now, there's another bowl game taking place, Ole Miss and Duke playing. They pushed that start time back about a half hour or so to accommodate this one. Notre Dame, though, wins what I expected was going to be a rock fight, and I think for a good chunk of this game did end up being a rock fight. I thought, though, Notre Dame, based on my expectations before they kicked off, came away looking better than I expected, especially on defense. That was what impressed me the most, I would say, across the board in this football game. And there were moments across the board, right? I thought Gunnar Stockton, to your point, actually looked pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought Riley Leonard running the football, something that I called out in the preview, looked pretty good. He's good at that. It's no surprise that they would use him in that capacity. But what we weren't really sure of, at least what I wasn't really sure of having watched Notre Dame for most of the year, is how this defense would fare against what I still think is a pretty good offense, albeit with the backup quarterback. Georgia's got more talent than anybody else Notre Dame had played all season long.
Correct.
The fact that their defense held serve in the manner that it did, again, for the third time now with the backup quarterback, still to me is damn impressive. So that's my biggest takeaway from what I saw tonight. How about you?
Yeah, it's that Notre Dame almost from the start dictated the terms of this game. They don't play a game unlike what Georgia plays, but we saw Georgia take those shots more often downfield, that they felt like they could lean on Gunnar Stockton downfield, that they could lean on whoever it was, Dominic Lovett or Dylan Bell or Arian Smith or Oscar Delp. They felt like there were plays to be had downfield, and they took many more shots. They tried to find opportunities more often than Notre Dame did. And because Notre Dame didn't take those shots and was happy to win this one in a phone booth and, get a hitch here, go for a screen opportunity there, maybe get an edge on the ground, that like they pickleballed their way beautifully to a win in this one. They won 3rd and short, 4th and short on both sides of the ball. We had that fire drill situation near the end of the game where they were able to draw Georgia off sides, that Notre Dame was able to stack more little things on both sides of the ball, that their offensive line came to play. And even though Jeremiah Love, who is their most explosive player, ultimately was not a huge factor, goes down injured, I think, as a knee issue of some kind. It was Riley Leonard left, Riley Leonard right. It was savvy situational decision-making from Notre Dame, execution from Notre Dame. And in those moments, whether it was those short yardage opportunities for Georgia or just mental miscues with a PI here, the horrible drop downfield, or the walk-on corner colliding with a referee on a big play, that sometimes it's just dumb bad luck and sometimes it's just not being locked in play to play. Notre Dame was closer to being locked in more often.
You mentioned Riley Leonard. It was clear about midway through the first quarter that they were going to resort to the game plan that we discussed in our preview and that I think we expected coming in.
Yeah.
Where they weren't going to be able to run their normal inside zone run scheme, whatever you want to call it, against this Georgia front, because the Georgia front's too damn good. They just weren't going to have any of that. If they were going to run it all, it was going to be on the legs of Riley Leonard. He was the team's leading rusher, had 80 yards, had a nice 32-yarder earlier in the game. He really was able to dictate the pace on the ground for Notre Dame and, give them what they needed. Again, like you said, won this one in a phone booth. Wasn't exactly the most explosive effort. They did return a kick for a touchdown, which obviously set momentum on a pretty good course to start off the second half when they got the ball.
By the way, that's being locked in every play. Don't allow a kick return touchdown.
That was absolutely a big deal for Notre Dame.
Huge.
Coming out of the halftime up 13-3, get that 7 to make it 20-3. Suddenly Georgia's got a different game in front of them. I thought Riley Leonard was impressive in this game. You're not going to see it looking at the stats, but if you watch the game, it's clear they trusted him to win this game for them. Defensively for Notre Dame, I talked about what they were able to do. I think they were able to stop the running threat from Georgia in a really, really effective way. Trevor Etienne, for the most part, held in check. His longest run was something like 8 yards. Nate Frazier, obviously, has got some burst. His longest run was 28 yards. The rest of the way, his other 3 carries, he only had 9 yards.
Right.
They gave up some big plays in this game. They gave up some big plays in the passing game, for sure. But none of those proved to be so much that Notre Dame couldn't overcome it or that it was anything that snowballed. The way that Notre Dame played defense in this game was such that, they allowed a big play here and there. They did not allow Georgia to gain any kind of momentum. There were moments in the game where it felt like Georgia was trying to build that momentum, but then there's a turnover. Then there's a 4th down stop. Notre Dame came to play in those key moments in this game to kind of stem that tide and prevent against anything getting out of hand, Georgia crawling their way back into this one. So I was really impressed with the way that they played defensively, the way they held Georgia in check. On the Georgia side, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you like what you saw out of Gunnar Stockton. I thought he looked pretty good. He had a turnover early with the fumble, the blindside strip sack, but all things considered, I thought he was pretty good. There was a throw later in the game that could have been a touchdown. They had a matchup, I think, that they liked that maybe could have gone for 6, but that was a bad throw. There were a couple key spots here where maybe his accuracy wasn't on point, but by and large, he didn't lose this game for them. This was just Notre Dame being suffocating on defense, being able to run their offense and bleed clock.
It was a masterful middle eight. When you score 23 points in a game, in a winning effort, a double-digit winning effort, right? That's double digits, 23-10.
Correct.
And 17 of those 23 come within 54 game seconds of each other. Yeah. When you kick a field goal, immediately force a fumble, immediately score another touchdown with 30-odd seconds before half, and then immediately return a kick. I was coming downstairs from getting a snack at halftime and seeing, who was it that returned the kick for a touchdown for Notre Dame?
Yeah, that was
Jaden Harrison.
Jaden Harrison, right.
For 98 yards. Like,
yep.
I mean, 17 points in 54 seconds is about as good as you can hope to accomplish a winning bout of point barraging, barely English, in a game like this.
The other thing that I come away from this feeling, at least in this one particular game, felt like Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much Kirby can do about drops.
Right.
There were opportunities there. In those moments, we saw Kirby, I think, kind of masterfully navigate the 8 overtime or whatever Georgia Tech game, calling those timeouts, setting themselves up to get a stop and get in the end zone. That was sort of manual labor. Like, Kirby dragged that team with, I think it was Nate Frazier who ran it in at the end in that game. It was just, there's only so much you can do with not your starting quarterback. And they trusted Gunnar Stockton, still not the starting quarterback.
Right.
Carson Beck is better. Carson Beck's best is better than Gunnar Stockton's best. So that affects things somehow, some way. That affects things. And then defensively, if your team can't get off the field on short yardage downs, I mean, the Notre Dame offense was called better. The effort on the ground from Riley Leonard, especially like even when they weren't setting an edge, Riley Leonard was winning one-on-one battles against Georgia safeties or linebackers or whoever was in that lane.
We kept talking on the stream that it was the war to get to 3rd and 4.
Yes.
The war to get to 3rd and 4. And Notre Dame was really effective at doing just that. You combine what they did on offense, which maybe was not electric, but was obviously serviceable enough to get points and win this game. Combine that with what they did on defense and special teams. They got a lot that they need to clean up, especially on D. I mean, there were a bunch of penalties, more penalties in this game on the Notre Dame side than I think we're accustomed to seeing. But finding ways to get things done, finding ways to create plays on defense and with special teams, that's something they've really been doing all year.
Did anything specifically surprise you about what happened or didn't happen in this game?
I was surprised how much it felt like Notre Dame was better.
Okay.
And maybe that's part of the SEC narrative permeating my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's some scar tissue from seeing Notre Dame in similar spots over the course of my lifetime as a fan. I don't know. I knew it would be a close game based on all the numbers that we ran. We've watched these teams. We've known these teams as well as anybody at this point. So seeing was believing for me. In theory, yes, this looked like it was going to be a close game. It's another thing altogether to see it happen, and to see it happen in the manner that it did, where watching this game, there were moments where it felt like Georgia might be able to get something going, but it didn't really feel like the game was ever in doubt for Notre Dame. They were the better team on this night, the better coach team on this night. I'm not saying Marcus Freeman's the better coach. I still think I would take Kirby Smart, but in this instance, it was Marcus Freeman who won some of those key situations, got the better of Kirby Smart.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Notre Dame went out there and acquitted itself in the manner that it did obviously won the game. But I don't think you can come away from this feeling like this was some sort of fluke win for Notre Dame. As somebody who roots for the team, that was something that concerned me, that you'll take a win however you can get it when you get to the stage of the game. But you never want to have to be in that situation where you're kind of like defending your own team because people are saying it's a fluke. This wasn't a fluke. They were the better team.
It's 20-10 with 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
That's a ton of time for Georgia to mount a touchdown drive. And then it's extremely tight. And then it's 20-17. They can't do it. Right. Notre Dame did what it, coincidentally enough, when you go back to what we talked about during like the Ian Book era of Notre Dame, Ian Book, Tommy Rees, like everything just seems very difficult for Notre Dame on offense. Like even when they complete a pass, it's a tightly contested pass. They're not scheming guys open. Other than the drop, a couple of throws, the Oscar Delp one over the middle, even the slants up the middle were contested that Gunnar Stockton was completing early. The touchdown was obviously wide open to Cash Jones. I think that was a great play call and execution.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Everything Georgia seemed to try was met with 2.5 gold helmets.
Yeah.
There were guys always in the vicinity for Notre Dame. And that's a well-coached defense. That's a patient defense. That's a defense that's studied. That's a defense that's, by the way, beat up, right down their best defensive tackle, obviously their best corner for the majority of the season. I don't know. This is a deep, talented defense that, mind you, I don't know how much you actually trust the numbers. You can trust the results, but obviously the quarterback's face this year, it's not a murderer's row.
No.
They're about to play a much better one, which will be fascinating. But Notre Dame just made it difficult. If Georgia was going to win this game, it was going to be on the back of executing 9.5 very difficult plays. And they executed 4, something like that, 6. And so, hats off to the Notre Dame defense for just coming to play and being in charge of this game.
Yeah, the other thing that I'll add quick, and then we should move on and talk a little bit more about what this all means and what the next round looks like. Notre Dame, you mentioned being down a guy like a Riley Mills. I thought they didn't miss a beat. It felt to me like they were in the trenches. More often than not, they were winning. They were getting pressure on Gunnar Stockton. Obviously, they weren't really taken advantage of on the ground by anyone on the Georgia side of things, and that was one of my concerns coming into this. It is a big Georgia offensive line, and granted, maybe the running game has not been there in the same capacity that we're used to seeing, but it's still, again, a pretty good offense. I'll say it for the 4th time. I know it's a backup quarterback. You don't have to tell me.
Yes.
But the fact that Notre Dame was able to win the point of attack as often as they did was another thing that was mildly surprising to me. I know they're good on defense, but to see them do it up against the SEC champion, that's pretty impressive.
They also got to Gunnar Stockton. They also forced a fumble early that just kind of went out of bounds, and they forced the biggest turnover of the game in the strip sack that led to that immediate touchdown right before the half. That Notre Dame's front, down whoever they were down, it was really coming off of the edge, and Gunnar Stockton seemed athletic enough, and it seemed to be a difference that Notre Dame, even when Gunnar Stockton would run for a first down, it was a 7-yard run. It wasn't a Sam Levitt 17. It wasn't a Sam Levitt 24 or Maddox Madsen, whatever, that they were able to limit Georgia, even in Georgia's successes, which is, again, it's a huge deal for Notre Dame. Georgia had opportunities to claw back into this one, and Riley Leonard said, just going to keep running it off tackle and hope for the best. I love the play call where they handed it to, remind me, the number 83 tight end.
Oh, yeah.
Look, it was just setting up 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 3s every time. And that's the comfort zone for Notre Dame.
It is. I mean, they found a few of these situations where, they're running kind of the end around to Jaden Thomas, or they're rushing the punt team on the field, and then they're bringing their offense on the field. They create chaos, which generates something of an offside situation on the Georgia side. They get a key first down. They're able to use that to help bleed the clock even more. Just a few things like that went Notre Dame's way, and that's ultimately what tipped the balance in their favor. 23-10 is your final. Notre Dame wins its 13th game of the year. As we said, all of the lower seeds won in the quarterfinal round. We had Texas winning in overtime, which we discussed, double overtime over Arizona State. That was a very good game in the end. We had Ohio State destroying, unfortunately for you,
for me anyway, not
Ducks,
for Buckeye fans.
Not for Buckeye fans, by a 41-21 margin. And then on New Year's Eve, we had Penn State cruising past Boise State 31-14. I say cruising past that game. There were
I don't think it was a cruise.
Plenty of instances in the second half of that game where it felt like perhaps momentum was shifting in favor of Boise, but in the end, Penn State gets the win by 17.
It was 17-14 in the third quarter.
That's right.
I thought Boise played well. They just are not built to beat a team like Penn State. The firepower at all facets of that offense outside of Ashton Ginty just aren't consistently there. And the defense, certainly the back end of that defense wasn't there. The tackling certainly wasn't there. Katron Allen got a ton of exercise, as did Nick Singleton. It sets up some fascinating narratives, storylines, matchups, interesting humans both on the sideline and on the field in the Cotton and Orange Bowls.
I have a list of questions here for you.
All right, I'll give you the correct answers.
Based on the other three games, again, you can go back and listen. We're not going to go and do the deep dive on the Rose Bowl, the Peach Bowl, and the Fiesta Bowl. We did that in the episode that we released on Thursday morning. But I had some leftover questions from each of those games, really from each of those teams playing in those games that I wanted to throw your way. We can talk about these semifinal matchups at some point before we get through the end of this episode. And of course, we're going to be doing our preview episode for the semifinal round at some point next week. My question on the Texas side is whether or not what we saw from Texas and how they handled themselves in the second half. Now, granted, they won.
They did.
But how they handled themselves in the second half against a team like an Arizona State, who it felt like they had dead to rights. Did the way that Texas handled itself down the stretch change your opinion for the good, for the bad, about how you feel with regards to the Longhorns now moving forward in this tournament?
I mean, what have we seen from Texas this year? We saw an impressive win against Michigan early on the road that didn't necessarily age all that well, considering Michigan's struggles offensively this year. So that was a bigger deal in the moment than it actually was long term. Otherwise, they beat a DJ Lagway less Florida.
Yeah. They
handled their business against Texas A&M, but it wasn't an offensive juggernaut performance. They scored 17 in that game. They haven't, against a good team, they haven't played a complete game. Against Georgia's backup quarterback in the SEC championship, they lose. Thrust into duty. Not like he wasn't planning all week to play in that game.
Right.
I think Texas is a good team with an excellent defense, largely, and an offense that can look incredible and can look extremely ordinary, especially with a beat-up offensive line. And so what happened in that Arizona State game? No, not a huge surprise, because we've seen this Texas team, be it this year, be it 2 years ago especially, disappear for a quarter and a half, especially in second halves a couple of years ago anyway, which is not the most relevant thing ever. Same quarterback. But no, it wasn't a huge surprise that Texas slowed to a halt the way that they did against ASU.
The question on the ASU side, I agree with you, by the way. The question on the ASU side, and this is partially a Kenny Dillingham thing. I think this is partially a game plan, a roster construction thing.
Yeah.
How much of the Arizona State season, how much of the Arizona State success should be the responsibility or should be something that we credit Cam Scadaboo with versus how much of it do we credit Kenny Dillingham with? Because, and the reason I ask that is this, both things I guess can be true at once.
Yeah, of course.
We have seen so many instances over the course of college football history where a team has one dynamic player and they were able to ride that dynamic player to incredible heights. Mm-hmm. Heights not imagined at the start of a season. This certainly would classify in that. But how much of this is Dillingham? How much of this is Scadaboo?
I'd give more to Dillingham because he built the totality or most of the totality, given how many guys they brought in the portal and bringing in Cam Scadaboo himself, Sam Levitt himself. So he gets more credit because of everybody on the field able to compete. Or not everybody, but most of the people on the field came to play for Kenny Dillingham. In terms of their success against Texas and in terms of the success they had this season, look, Jordan Tyson was an all Big 12 caliber receiver. Guys on that defense made plays, especially up front all season long. They got better over the course of the season. They, despite the weird ending against BYU with people on the field, leaving the field, back to the field with the weird time and clock management issues in that game, throwing the ball straight up and leaving seconds on the clock. It's a great story. I think it's much more than Cam Scatterbo, who just happens to be excellent. And
well, listen,
yeah,
this is year 2.
It's year 2.
And Arizona State was in a really bad situation. That program was in a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he was able to reboot it as quickly, even with Cam Scatterbo, right?
Yeah.
Take Cam Scatterbo out of this thing, it was still a good team. Now, he was their best offensive player, far and away. That helps. But the fact that Kenny Dillingham was able to get this team to this point so quickly in his tenure, I think I put a lot more credit on Kenny Dillingham. Absolutely.
And they also set themselves up in this portal era. Like, if you're an unhappy Big Ten player, if you're an unhappy Big 12 player elsewhere, if you're an unhappy West Coast player at Oregon, Washington, whatever, come to Tempe, right?
Yeah.
Like, you see the portal successes of guys like Scatterbo and Sam Levitt, and you see that Kenny Dillingham can take this team to unforeseen heights so quickly that if the money is there behind the scenes, which it sounds like it increasingly is, and he got extended his contract, that things are trending in a crazy positive direction.
My Ohio State question is simply, is anybody beating Ohio State?
I can't see it in this moment. Now, you never say never, given Ohio State's propensity this season to coming up short in big games.
Sure.
Or nearly coming up short against Nebraska. If you are a believer that all things Ohio State issue-wise have been solved since the Michigan loss, which there's a good amount of evidence now that those issues have been solved against Tennessee and Oregon heading into their game against Texas, especially given Texas's struggles themselves in big games, I would take Ohio State against the field and not really think that much about it in this moment. Mostly because of the defense, to be honest. I know Jeremiah Smith rightfully gets a ton of attention.
Yeah.
If you're bringing that defense and at least a pretty good offense to the table, forget looking like they did against either Tennessee or Oregon. If they're scoring 27 points with this defense, who's getting to 28?
I just wonder what the best matchup is. If you're rooting against Ohio State, as I'm sure a number of our listeners are.
Yeah.
What is the matchup that you want? What is the matchup that you think presents the biggest challenge for Ohio State? It could be Texas.
It's the team that you feel like can get after the quarterback the most often, because that's the only real solution in this moment against a still beat up offensive line. Because if Will Howard has time, it's probably game over. So do you like Colin Simmons? Do you like Abdul Carter coming off of some kind of mystery injury?
Right.
I don't think Notre Dame's built to beat Ohio State.
I don't know if I trust Notre Dame's secondary, a younger secondary.
Right. They struggled against SC.
Yeah. I mean, that's a matchup that concerns me if it ends up coming to fruition. And that's not to say Notre Dame can't run. Its offense can't do what it's showed it can do now against Georgia, against Ohio State with Riley Leonard. I think there would be some element of trying to grind the clock, playing pickleball, trying to wear them down, trying to create plays again with their defense. But the Georgia offense is a far cry from the Ohio State offense at this point. I don't know if there's a great matchup. I'm inclined to say Texas is still the best matchup if you're rooting for an Ohio State loss, but even that I think is taken on some water given what we saw against Arizona State. Let me ask you a question about your Oregon Ducks.
By the way, you asked me the question.
Yeah.
And my answer was the vague, whoever's pass rush you trust the most.
Yeah.
I think there's a decent chance they just beat the team who had the best chance to beat them.
Oh, that's
that team was down
possible.
34-0.
Well, let me ask you about Oregon then.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Oregon.
Please.
We had a question before this game about whether or not we trusted Ryan Day or Dan Lanning more.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I don't even remember what our answer was. But there was some conjecture about big games being in Ryan Day's head.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we at with Dan Lanning as a big game coach? Because young dude, obviously able to amass talent in Eugene.
Yep.
Nobody's calling for Dan Lanning to be ousted or anything. I'm not saying that. I love Dan Lanning. I think he's a great coach.
I mean, there are anonymous people on Twitter, if that's...
They don't count. Yeah. No, I'm not talking about those people. But where are we at with Dan Lanning in his maturation process as a big game coach?
It wasn't a great moment for Oregon against Ohio State. He didn't lose to a team twice this year, beat the team that beat him in the playoff. So it feels like a significant step forward if the first year in a new conference, Oregon, especially if you told me before the season, they're going to beat Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State this year.
You would take that, yeah?
They're going to win the Big Ten
and
beat those three teams on their way there. You're like, that's definitely a step forward.
Yeah.
Given the actual nature of how they lost to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, yes, it's okay to say like, ooh, they need to figure out this rematch thing because they lost in a rematch last year in the biggest game of the season in the Pac-12 championship game against Washington. Yeah. And they lost in a rematch in the postseason this year. So that's on a head coach. That's on game planning. That's on preparedness. But I don't know how you look at the Oregon program with what they're doing, building up the talent and then the roster and everything, buzzing through the season 13-0 with a couple close calls early, a close call against Wisconsin, obviously a close call and a win against Ohio State, and come away thinking they're like, oh yeah, the trajectory is absolutely emphatically positive for Oregon at this moment. So
I think the main reason I asked that question is because I've seen some of the chatter out there, people kind of doubting where this guy is at, or if he's a good enough coach to win the big one. And I think that's fine to ask. I understand why you would ask it. They just got destroyed by Ohio State. Bear in mind, we're going into year 3. Bear in mind, he's done a really good job overhauling that roster, bringing Oregon to the point now where they were number 1 in the country for a good chunk of the season. Right?
By the way,
that in and of itself is a pretty big step forward.
How many head coaches left in this college football playoff have won a national championship?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it 0?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's 0. It's very hard to do. Nick Saban's not in the sport. Jim Harbaugh's not in the sport. Mac Brown's not in the sport. Ed Orgeron's not in the sport because, yes, we have to hold Ed Orgeron in esteem because that 2019 LSU team was just an all-time great. So, yes, you can go down the list. Dan Lanning happens to be louder, happens to be more of a showman, happens to attract more attention than a lot of these guys. If you're an Oregon fan, you're absolutely thrilled with where the program is, even in the shadow of.
I agree with
that kind of performance.
My big question on the Penn State side, honestly, there's a lot of excitement on the Penn State side of this, making it to a national semifinal. I totally get it. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
My question is whether Penn State is getting better offensively, or if their last 2 opponents were just weaker and made them look better than they are. Now, I say that. They also look pretty good against your Oregon Ducks.
They did.
Maybe that doesn't mean as much now, given what we saw Ohio State do to Oregon. I still tend to value that pretty fondly in the back of my mind.
The Oregon defense held the Ohio State offense to only 7 points in the second half. So that is okay. No, you're right. Continue.
So I'm just curious, outside in, Penn State, is Penn State improving the way I think they are improving? I do think they are getting better. If nothing more, Katron Allen is getting better. He has had an incredible resurgence these last 3 games. The way that they're able to dictate the pace of play on the ground, I think, has been instrumental in getting them to the semifinal. It would have been the case whether it was against Boise and SMU or against anybody else in this tournament. But that's a side of their game that has not been as reliable the way it has been the last 3. And so from my standpoint, I think there are elements of the offense that are getting better. I don't think it's entirely because of opponent. Opponent might help, but certainly their offense seeming to find more of a rhythm. I don't think that's the kind of thing you can fake just based on the opponent.
Okay. So you and I both know, you especially, James Franklin has been there since what? 2015, 14, somewhere in there?
No.
He is exclusively judged by what his team does in their biggest games, rightfully so, because he's been there so long, especially Ohio State, Michigan, schools like that, in terms of winning and in terms of how they look in those wins or how they look in those games, period. They lose a Big Ten championship to Oregon with the offense looking good. They lose to Ohio State, scoring 0 offensive touchdowns this season, and they've really struggled against Ohio State. Penn State has a very good offense this year. I think they're something like 9th or so in points per drive, something like that. You ask any Penn State fan, you say, is the offense fixed now that they've done this against SMU and Boise? And I am of the mind, and you can speak to this more than I can, of the mind, we're like, it's cool. It's nice. Doesn't matter. Or it doesn't cinch anything. It doesn't prove anything that this offense could move the ball in frigid conditions against SMU, kind of, and obviously was able to smash Boise on the ground. It's nice. It's cool. It doesn't make you any more. It shouldn't make you any more confident until you see it against, and I would include Notre Dame in this grouping, Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, whoever, on this kind of stage. I
think this game we're going to see against Notre Dame is going to be a lot like the one we just saw with Notre Dame and Georgia. I think it's going to be a lot like the one we saw with Penn State, Ohio State earlier in the year. Yeah. I think we're headed towards another rock fight. I have not done the deep dive yet. Obviously, I've watched these two teams closer than any of the other 132 in college football. So gut instinct is to say this is going to be another rock fight of sorts, but I want to take some time to go back and rewatch these games and see how I feel about them on the other side of it. But I tend to think there are elements of this Penn State offense that are getting better, and they're doing so. They're peaking at just the right time now as they get a little bit deeper into this tournament. You're right, though. It doesn't cinch anything. To do it against Boise State and SMU, or even to do it in a losing effort against Oregon, that only counts for so much. Now you got to do it in the Capital One Orange Bowl against Notre Dame, which should be a good test for the offense, right? That's going to be their best test since probably that Ohio State game earlier in the year.
By the way, I asked you earlier, like, did anything shock you in the Notre Dame result against Georgia? Just as I'm thinking about Notre Dame, Penn State, I was shocked that given how Notre Dame was playing that game, that something didn't open up for them to try that shot. I think Riley Leonard did throw the ball downfield big once, and it wasn't there.
No.
I was expecting some kind of play call that they set up, that it was Jadarian Price on a wheel route. You know, that I was like, oh, that went for 53.
Or Jeremiah Love, you know. They didn't really do a whole lot to try and get him when he was in the game.
Right.
In space. Maybe we saw a little bit in the second half before he went out. Like it just was, they didn't even really try for the big game breaking plays. That
was the surprise to me, that they weren't able to set something up, lulling Georgia to sleep with shorter stuff and the run game. And I'm curious because I think they're going to need that against Penn State. I mean, it might still be a rock fight. It might absolutely be low scoring. And I guess technically you could say they got that play via kick return.
Yes.
That they were gonna need some sort of explosive moment. And Ty, don't we all need explosive moments in our lives?
Here.
They needed that moment, and I think they're going to need 2 or 3 of them against Penn State.
My question about Boise State is whether or not Boise State's a fraud.
No.
Is Boise a fraud to you based on that game on New Year's Eve?
No, absolutely not. Now, the way this tournament was seeded positions Boise State in a light where, like, you, I guess, can broach that conversation. They're not, like, they took Oregon to the final whistle on the road.
No.
They won the rest of their games. And it wasn't Boise's idea to be seated where they were. They, again, second half was a 3-point game. They got their, especially offensive line, under control after a shaky start against Penn State. Everybody knew what Boise's plan was going to be in this game. Feed Ashton Genty until Penn State can prove they can stop him. They stopped him. I don't know. I think it's a crazy successful season for Boise State, and we shouldn't judge them against what they were able to do or not do against Penn State. So no, not a fraud. This is Spencer Danielson's first season as a head coach.
First full season, yeah.
First full season. Was interim, made full-time, immediately took them to the playoff with a bye.
I'm glad Boise was in this tournament.
Same.
I am. I'm glad Boise was in this tournament. I think to your point from earlier, they were in this game for the most part until later on. Penn State was eventually able to pull away.
Yeah.
But Maddox Madsen acquitted himself pretty well. It wasn't so much on Maddox Madsen, even though he had a couple interceptions.
Yeah.
This was Penn State having more athletes out wide to guard against any of the targets running downfield for Boise.
Yeah.
They just weren't able to get separation. Maddox Madsen had guys breathing down his neck the entire game. He had to make some throws. He had to try and force some throws. They really had no choice. I don't put so much of this on him. I just think they were overmatched in this game. They've got a ways to go if they want to go a little bit farther in this tournament moving forward, for sure.
Right.
That's a separate conversation altogether. But, the fact they were able to get Ashton Ginty and keep him on campus for his final season, important, right? Important. Says something about the health of the program. The fact that it felt like they were right there neck and neck with your Oregon Ducks for a good chunk of the way, most of the way.
They were up playing that game. Yeah.
This is a team that I think throughout the course of the season had its moments, had some up and downs, but acquitted itself pretty well, even in defeat here, even in defeat in the Fiesta Bowl after the bye.
I mean, I think of all of the underdogs in this tournament, this quote unquote tournament, Boise State might have acquitted itself the best of all of them. They scored multiple touchdowns as a heavy underdog, and they were in a game in the second half. Was Oregon? Nope.
No. I mean, for me, it's still Arizona State. There's probably a conversation about Clemson as well, but
Arizona State is fine. Yes.
Boise deserves to be part of that conversation.
Boise acquitted itself more than Indiana did.
Oh my God.
More than Oregon did. Yep. More than SMU did.
Yep.
So no, Boise absolutely belonged.
That brings us then to the national semifinals. We've got two of them. They are next Thursday and Friday.
Mm-hmm.
The Orange Bowl is Penn State against Notre Dame, as I said earlier. Notre Dame favored by 1.5. The Cotton Bowl is on Friday night. Ohio State favored by 6 over Texas. It's a 5 versus an 8, a 6 versus a 7, Dan. As you look at these matchups, mindful of the fact that we're not doing the full preview right now, what are the biggest questions for you, gut instinct, in both of those matchups?
I mean, it's the Texas offense creatively moving the ball, adjusting to what Ohio State is doing successfully on defense. It's Quinn Ewers off platform, I think, is the entirety of this game. Obviously, we saw the running game disappear against Arizona State because Devils did a really good job shutting that down. So it's Texas diagnosing a game plan to go against this Ohio State defense, and then what are their third and fourth pitches looking like against the Ohio State defense? That to me is everything. And then in Penn State, Notre Dame, I think it's honestly, it's the easiest possible answer, but it's like, I don't know, whichever quarterback is better.
Yeah.
Like Drew Aller was very good against Boise State, but you can't say, or I guess which passing game is better, because it's not only on Drew Aller, who's come under pressure a little bit for the offensive line in front of him and has had to deal with drops, dealt with it against Boise State, has dealt with it, dealt with a couple key ones against Oregon. And I mean, that to me feels like a race to 21 or something.
Yeah. I think Notre Dame is very content to play rock fights.
Of course.
I think they're built to play in matchups like that. I think that's part of why you also are right to assume that the matchup against Ohio State might be the worst case scenario for Notre Dame if they want to win this thing. For a multitude of reasons, I guess you could say that about the other two teams in this tournament outside of Ohio State. Both Texas and Penn State would have similar issues with the Buckeyes. My biggest question in the Penn State-Notre Dame game is, can Notre Dame again do the Riley Leonard thing? Can they get away with that against Penn State? They were able to make it work against Georgia. I think proof of concept wise, if you can do it against Georgia, you should be able to do it against Penn State. You might be able to do it against almost anybody. I don't know, as you get deeper into this thing, if you end up playing Ohio State, if you can get enough production out of that. But I think in this matchup against Penn State, if they're able to put Riley Leonard on the move, if they are able to get two healthy running backs, if Jeremiah Love isn't too banged up with his knee injury, I'm real curious to see how they used the ground game against Penn State, because this is another really, really tough defense against the run, and they will know what to do. They've been pretty good against that all season. Now, Oregon was able to run on Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that in the Big Ten title game, and I'd be curious to see if there's anything that Notre Dame borrows schematically from what Oregon did to try and get one over on the Nittany Lions. But I think that, just from a chess match standpoint, is the most fascinating of these two matchups. Certainly Texas versus Ohio State, I think, is intriguing on a whole other level, just from a talent standpoint. Penn State, Ohio State, or Penn State, Notre Dame, excuse me, is going to stylistically be a chess match that will be interesting to watch from the Skycast behind the action.
Yep.
Texas, Ohio State is, at least on the surface, going to be top billing. Top billing because of the talent on both sides of the football. Top billing just because of what we saw from Ohio State the last 2 rounds of this thing. First against Tennessee, most recently now against Oregon. Biggest question is, does Texas and its vaunted defense have an answer for what Ohio State's done now these last 2 weeks? Signs would point to no.
Right.
Especially given the fact that they gave up, 31 to Arizona State, and they almost gave that Peach Bowl away on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
But this is still a defense that we have come to trust, and a coordinator in Pete Kwiatkowski who we've come to trust. So can they dial something up? Can they find it within themselves to find that next gear going into this Ohio State matchup, I think is the big question. If they can't, we already know what's going to happen. If they can't, and if we see the same version of Ohio State that we saw the last 2 games, it's going to be the Buckeyes against either Penn State or Notre Dame for the title.
A lot of big Pac-12 energy, by the way, in the Ohio State-Texas game. How many times did Chip Kelly in Oregon just completely slap around Sark in Washington?
Yeah.
That's
fascinating.
There's a lot of connective tissue in both of these, obviously, and I think the most important one, as we can all agree, Ty Hildenbrandt, growing up a Notre Dame fan, as a Penn State alumnus, I
need my Laura Quinn jersey. I got to get my Laura Quinn jersey.
You feel more emotionally attached in this moment to Notre Dame, even though you are a big Penn State fan.
People have been slinging arrows at me, man, in the YouTube comments because of this.
They've been slinging arrows at you since 2008.
I've been taking arrows about this for a long time now.
Yeah.
Raised a Notre Dame fan, Penn State alum. I am torn on a couple different levels. I think from a pure fan standpoint, just from a rooting interest, I have to root for my childhood favorite team.
You don't have to do anything.
I don't have to do
anything.
anything.
You're in charge of yourself. You have agency.
This is how I feel, Dan.
I know.
I think I have to pull a little bit more for Notre Dame, but it is a little bit like trying to pick your favorite sibling, like a parent trying to pick your favorite child. I like both these teams, and my love for Penn State has grown throughout the years. Obviously, given the fact that I have a diploma hanging on my wall upstairs.
You do have a favorite dog, though, right? The older bitch.
The older bitch is the OG, but to say one is the favorite at this point.
Oh, I'm just kidding.
It's a little bit hard.
Okay. No, this is... Yeah, I got to think that given how I've seen you react to major Notre Dame losses and major Penn State losses, I think it has gutted you more to see Notre Dame lose those games. That's generally the tell.
Me more. It has definitely gutted me more. And the other thing that I should add for people who have listened to this show forever, and often ask us, how did this all start? This all started when you went to a Penn State Notre Dame game in State College and made a video, and
Jimmy
I saw it.
First start.
Yeah, I was there. I saw the video at the time. We were both doing work for SI.com. And I sent you an email complimenting the video. It was fun. I liked the video. That was what set us on this course now all these years later. So it's not just significant for me. It's significant for us, for the show.
It's solid verbal lore, solid verbal canon.
It is. I can't believe that this has happened. When these brackets came out, this was, I think, the most popular semifinal matchup among the people that were picking these games. Either Oregon or Ohio State was making it out of that one bracket, but everything else seems like, just from the standpoint of popular opinion, we kind of got what we expected here. And so the fact that we've got Penn State against Notre Dame to me is pretty cool.
By the way, here's my final sidebar. Penn State and Notre Dame should be rivals. Neither of these teams have legit regional rivals that feel as if they are their biggest rival. Like, you could say, like, Notre Dame, Michigan. Notre Dame's never going to be as important to Michigan as Ohio State. No. Penn State, Michigan State, Penn State, Maryland. No, of course not. These two teams, like, you want to set them up with each other. You want to, like, take them to a cafe and be like, you're into funk bass. You're into funk bass. You guys should get together and start a funk band. We got to get this rivalry going somehow, some way. It just makes too much sense, regardless of your affiliations.
Yeah,
this should be a major deal game, major deal rivalry every season. It makes
maybe this will set them down that path.
I hope
but
so.
I can tell you, as a former Penn State student, the attempt at force-feeding a Michigan State rivalry to us never quite landed. Never quite landed. Again, I've joked about this for an eternity now. The biggest rivalry stems from a blood drive, not from the football game.
Yeah. Michigan
So,
State
I'm
people
all
want
for
to
it.
smash Michigan.
I'm all for it.
More than any other game, right? It has to be. Yes.
I would think.
So, I don't know. Anyway, so I hope there's something here, but whatever. This should be really fun. We'll figure out what we're going to do in terms of travel plans. Nothing's finalized. Whether we're going to Miami, whether we're going to go to Atlanta, whether we're going to do both, whether we're going to do neither. We got to figure it out.
We got to figure it out. Yeah, we got to figure it out. So, again, your final score here, 23-10 Notre Dame, the 7th seed knocks off Georgia, the number 2 seed. It's going to be Notre Dame, a 1.5-point favorite over Penn State in the Orange Bowl next Thursday. It's going to be Ohio State, the 8th seed, a 6-point favorite over Texas, the 5 seed on Friday night in the Cotton Bowl. The national championship then is going to be played, I guess, about a week and a half later, January the 20th. It's a Monday night, as per usual, in Atlanta.
Yes, sir.
We'll see what happens. We appreciate everybody's support over these last 2 days. For those who have been watching us live, this concludes our 4th stream in 24 hours. That's been a personal record for us. Thank you to everybody who helped support what we do. We're really excited about it. The numbers have been so good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been fun to watch these games. We've had a lot of fun talking them through. Maybe not on the Oregon side. I apologize, but
it's okay.
It's at least meaningful college football later into the year than we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're grateful to that to some extent. So
definitely.
Thank you to everybody for your support. Please check out verballers.com for more information on getting in our bingo game, which we'll talk more about. I promise you. I've been saying that for a while. I promise we will talk more about that. Just go on out to verballers.com, sign up for free, and you'll get the information emailed to you probably Friday morning as we do an update. Of course, you can always go out to your favorite podcasting app of choice, hit follow, hit subscribe, going out to YouTube, subscribe to the channel there as well so that you don't miss any of our content. As Dan said, we still have a long way to go here. There are 2 really big games in the next round. There's obviously the biggest of them all coming up in a few weeks. We're going to do our best to make sure that you're right on the bleeding edge. For that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrandt. Thanks again for downloading, for listening, for supporting, for hanging with us here through another round of the college football playoff. We'll talk to y'all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.